In the world of firefighting and public safety, reliability is key. That's why for over 2 decades, first responders nationwide have trusted the Fire Store as their go-to source for essential equipment, apparel, and accessories. From top-of-the-line firefighting gear like helmets, boots, and thermal imaging cameras, the Fire Store has it all, tailored to the specific needs of our heroes on the front lines. But they don't stop there. Their extensive selection also includes EMS supplies, safety apparel like flame-resistant clothing and high-visibility gear, as well as a wide array of tools from hand tools to vehicle extrication tools, supporting public safety professionals in their duties. Partnered with industry leaders, the Fire Store's commitment to quality and excellence is unmatched because when it comes to protecting communities, there's no room for compromise. Join the thousands of first responders who rely on the Fire Store. Visit thefirestore.com online or in store today. The Fire Store, your reliable partner for fire and public safety equipment. Hi, Chris McClune here with Fire Apparatus and Emergency Equipment. Welcome to this episode of our podcast. You're going to see today we have a third guest, not just two. We do have a third guest today. I have Nick Wilbur here again, and Win Slauch, and Alex Moody also is with us today. Alex will be introducing himself in a minute. I'm going to be turning things over to Nick to run today, and what they're going to talk about are rescue pumpers. And now, where we came up with talking about this today, when we were going over platforms and aerials during our last podcast, we were getting a little bit into combining fire company functions. In this case, we're going to be talking about combining rescue and engine company operations into one unit. This is a reality for many departments around the country. But what can happen when you do that, if you don't do it carefully, is you can build a truck that ends up being impractical for your firefighters, impractical for the streets in your local, among other things. So that's what we're going to talk about today, and that's kind of the genesis of that. After every episode, we sit back for a few minutes, talk about what we might get into the next time, and that's what we came up with. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nick to kind of run things here. Have a good podcast, fellas, and don't forget to have fun with it.
We'll definitely do that, and hopefully we'll do some educating along the way as well. So since this is Alex Moody's first time on here, I'll have him just kind of give a brief introduction of himself and a little bit of background for the listeners. Alex?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So I started my fire service career in my teenage years with the Occoquan Woodbridge Lorton Fire Department in Northern Virginia, and I was with them for close to 8 years, and was involved at another company for some private EMS and hazmat and service like that. And then I was 2016, lucky enough to be hired by the Arlington County Fire Department, where our paths started crossing, and now we work together on a regular basis. That's about it.
Oh, yeah, and Moody didn't necessarily mention it, but he's assigned to Rescue 102 in Arlington on the Technical Rescue Squad for Arlington County, and that's kind of where we cross our paths on every 3 days or so, or a third of our lives. All right, so let's dive in and. Like Chris mentioned, we're talking about the combination of the engine and the rescue vehicle. So I guess the first question is really the most obvious one, right? Why would you specify a rescue engine, right? What would make you think that the rescue engine is the way to go instead of buying two separate vehicles? And kind of run through that thought process. And I guess we'll kick it to Moody first, since you're first time on here.
Thanks. No pressure.
No pressure.
So, there's a lot of different reasons. And if you're combining apparatus at any point, hopefully there was an impetus for that and you didn't just decide that was the thing that needed to be done. So you kind of break it down. You can either be upgrading an engine to have rescue capabilities because you've determined that maybe mutual aid partners aren't close enough and you need some help. Dealing with some auto accidents in your first due, or even maybe kind of adjacent to your first due. Or you could be downgrading. Maybe you have a heavy rescue in your station and you're not really utilizing that vehicle. Maybe it's not going out the door in very many runs. Staffing can be a problem. You have 2 units to pick from, and maybe that's not the unit your members are picking when they're rolling in the door. So you'll have to maybe compromise on those units so that you can kind of get the best bang for your buck in terms of personnel, response times, and vehicle use.
Yeah, awesome. Wynn, you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think the big change is or the big reason is that something in the department's changed, whether it's your response territory, the type of responses that you're seeing, or even changes in personnel from, if you have, like Moody said, you have a big heavy rescue that's set up for tech rescue and hazmat and all these other types of calls, but you've fallen off of the training. Your members are unable to keep up with it due to, and this is probably more volunteer than a combination or a career department at this point, but, you're unable to keep up with that training. But I think the big thing is that your response districts change. And I'll talk about something that's here where I live. And we'll go back 40 or 45, 50 years to where there was a single rescue for the entire southern portion of my county. We cover a portion of the Route 1 corridor with 5 different fire companies for approximately 26 or so miles. And 45 or 50 years ago, there was one rescue company that covered that entire area. Now, as people moved out from the suburbs or from the city into the rural area and suburbs, and that need for those 5 fire companies down the line to increase their services, that changed. So over the last 45 years, we've seen the rescue combination rescue engine come into play to where it's been, a needed resource in the area. But now in 2024, we're seeing this change to where we're all going to head back to the opposite direction, to where we're going to drop down from, rescue engines to engine rescues. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, and go back to really one big rescue company for the entire corridor again. And again, that's just a change in what we're responding to. Entrapments are down, cars are safer, seatbelts, whereas 45, 50 years ago, the cars were increasing, entrapments, ejections, things like that were greater because the safety features in the cars weren't the same. So again, it's just that almost cyclical change that we're seeing, to where it's dictating our apparatus choices and our selections. I think that the big thing that you really want to make sure of, and why you're doing this, or make sure that why you're not specifying a combination piece, is that you're not trying to replace personnel with apparatus. I think that's a really big thing. I think you hear that a lot. Well, we just don't have these people anymore, or this or that. But you can't replace personnel with apparatus. You're still going to have the same issues. And if you're looking at dropping $1.5 million on fire trucks, then, and you have personnel issues, then we might need to step back and look at putting $1.5 million into personnel issues. So I think that's the big key, is that you can't replace people with apparatus. And when you're doing a combination unit like this, you really have to keep that in mind. And again, we'll talk about some more kind of reasons behind that here in a little bit, about function. But I think changes in your area and your department are the 2 big things: upgrade or downgrade, from what you have to what you need to go to.
Yeah, bring up really good points. I think another thing to look at is we've talked about it in the latter talks for in depth, was looking at your neighbors, and that's a huge one, and that goes back to staffing too. And I think that influences people's decisions, or it should. If someone's staffing a rescue squad fully staffed, that's going to change what you're going to be doing in your area. I think gone are the days that you can do everything in one firehouse now. Back in the old days when they had one of everything and you were capable of it all. So it's looking at your neighbors and starting to share resources. So I think that's a huge point when you're looking at
right.
it.
And we talked about that with the towers and the aerials last month. Where you're looking at, hey, if there's 2 of these on one side, then does everybody need a rescue in your area, or can one unit or company staff the engine and the other one staff a rescue? So again, I think looking at that as a whole in the area, especially in today's environment of multi-million-dollar fire trucks and 4 to 5 year timeframes or 3 to 4 year timeframes. I think that that's key. I think that you have to look at that combination, of services between multiple departments in order to cover a large area.
So yeah, here, as you notice, I'm not in my normal background. I'm out in New Carlisle, Indiana, and we're doing evaluation of their fleet here. And one of their vehicles here is Squad 91. And so that's just another common term that people like to call the rescue engine type vehicle. There's the engine rescue. There's all these terms that are kind of thrown out there. And so let's break that down. What are these terms? Is there a meaning behind some terms? Do you think there's a more appropriate term? Let's just talk about that before we get too deep into this. We'll start with you first, Win.
Yeah, I think that it comes back to kind of what I've been saying on all the podcasts we've done is you have to identify the function of what you're attempting to do. What is the main function of it? And, the term rescue engine is there, but is it a fire truck where rescue is a priority, or is it going to be a fire truck where engine is a priority? And you can get into both of them, but you have to identify that function up front. A rescue engine, in my opinion, is going to have where the capabilities or the main function is going to be rescue. So obviously, when you identify rescue as the main priority there, the ability to do quality engine work or have the same capabilities as a true engine company are going to be decreased. Whereas if you prioritize, hey, the engine's going to be the main function here, but we still need to have some rescue capabilities, then you're going to give up some of the ability to do rescue work. And again, it comes back to that function or the capability. What am I truly looking to do here? Do I truly need to provide rescue services for a multitude of different fire calls, or do I need to provide the engine services and still have the capability to handle the 90% of the rescue calls that we deal with on a daily basis in our response area? And I think that's really what it comes down to is taking that time to prioritize or what the function is, and then building the fire truck around that function, understanding that you're going to give up something when you're doing that.
Anything to add, Moody?
Yeah, I think, the other thing too is when you start taking some of, classes in our region, you start running around with, people from a lot of different areas, and we start having these conversations about what they're capable of, or even they're expanding their training. I've talked with numerous people. They're attending these specialty classes, and some of them are tech rescue, some of them are going to the hazmat route or water rescue, but they're trying to be responsible for more in their area. So they're sending their people out to get training, right? Because you can't replace training with apparatus, as we've kind of discussed before, but they're going out and getting this training, and now they're coming back to their departments trying to build these programs, and they need equipment and they need somewhere to put it. But that doesn't necessarily mean spending $1 million on another fire truck. So then you run into putting equipment on an engine so they have it with them. So that can open up those responsibilities changing, or your department deciding you want to be able to respond to more variety of hazards. That may drive this decision as well, which I think just kind of jives completely with Slauch's point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was getting back to, again, this priority. When you look at a rescue engine, tools and equipment are the priority on that. Like Moody just said, you have to put stuff somewhere. And again, you're prioritizing rescue as the main function or capability of this apparatus. So you're going to give up, hose bed to get full depth, full height compartments on both sides. You're gonna give up pump capabilities possibly. Your low hose bed height might get higher if you're gonna understack ladders or things like that. Whereas if you're coming back and you're saying, hey, engine's my priority, then the hose bed is going to be the priority on that. And you're going to build and specify your truck around that hose bed. Whereas maybe you just go full height, full depth on one side and keep a traditional engine look on the other side. But there you're going to lose the ability to put tools, but you still have all the hose lines, your lengths, and your layout capabilities to cover the true engine company functions that you need to provide in that situation. So again, it's understanding what you're going to give up and what that priority is.
Yeah, I think you guys, are kind of touching on it now, and you talk about the engine company side, the rescue company side. I think engine company side kind of gets a little straightforward, and maybe we can dive into that. But I think the true heart of this is adding that rescue resource in. So let's break it down. What rescue work, and I guess really better is what type of extrication are you planning to do, and what are the different types of extrication? Moody, why don't you break that down for us? What does extrication mean, and how can we kind of define that to fit the mission of this vehicle?
Yeah, I think you have to divide and really kind of it's your stabilization you're breaking up, right? Because I'm going to list through a couple different ways that I like to divide it in my head. So there's 3 different main ways we can talk about this, just to let people know where we're going. So vehicles on all 4 tires. That's pretty basic. We're not really looking at, earth-shattering puzzles that we have to put together to stabilize these vehicles. That doesn't mean that it's not going to be a complicated extrication where you need those hand tools, maybe hydraulic tools, what have you, to actually make access, make space, and get your patient out. But the stabilization is not going to require much. Maybe some step chocks, some cribbing, not a ton. Sometimes just pulling the plugs out of the tires and letting them deflate can do everything you need it to do. So that's not going to take up the most space for equipment. The next 2 categories are where we really start to increase our complexity in terms of the equipment we're going to need and maybe even the tactics we're going to employ. So vehicles on anything but all 4 tires. Okay. So we're talking on your sides, on roofs, any of those angles in between. That is going to require more equipment. And then the highest category that I think we need to touch on towards the end is your heavy vehicles, your commercial vehicles, your big semi trucks. They just had a really great podcast the other day on here actually about school bus extrication. That is a whole different category of vehicle accident that most of us aren't always responding to, let alone preparing for. As I said, the vehicle on 4 tires, I think that one's pretty self-explanatory, and maybe a combi tool, some cribbing, that might get you where you need to be. And maybe that's not going to be a complicated problem for you to solve with your apparatus. But those other orientations, if we need to manipulate the vehicle or lift it, on its roof or on its side, that creates challenges in terms of what equipment you need, let alone the personnel required to respond to such an incident too. So your cribbing needs are going to increase. Your strut complement is probably going to increase. All of the accessories that go with those struts. I mean, they're really great technology out there in these struts these days across the spectrum that will fit your needs, but they take up room that we're not generally making on an engine. Same with lifting capabilities. If you want to go the route of airbags or some kind of strut that also lifts, there's those things, and regulators, bottles, all of the accoutrement that goes with lifting a vehicle. Heavy vehicle is the one where you've heard me go on a soapbox before, but I'll try not to. It is a separate discipline from your passenger vehicles. You're dealing with loads potentially up to 80,000 pounds, whereas your sedans and, passenger family vehicles, any of those things are probably sub 10,000 pounds. So it's easier to account for those with pretty basic equipment and maybe not, an extensive investment and tons of training to get your people capable of mitigating those hazards and making the situation better for your citizens. Keep in mind when we talk about these weights as we go through stuff like this, if a vehicle is 80,000 pounds and it tips over, that's worst case scenario, right? If it's on the ground, you're probably not stabilizing 80,000 pounds. You're probably looking at closer to 50%. That's not perfect, just a rule of thumb. You're probably looking at roughly 40,000 pounds. Well, now, if you get a couple 20,000 pound struts, on paper, that sounds like enough, but you take the size of these vehicles into account, it's probably way more than 2 struts. So now you're starting to delve into a territory that I don't want to make a judgment, and Slauch could probably correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I don't think you're rescue engine or engine rescue is going to be capable of that level of rescue. That is a separate priority. But when you scale it back to your passenger vehicles and all of those forms that those incidents can take, now we're having a more reasonable conversation that I think you can figure out where you want to be able to respond effectively and help out with these incidents. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's there. It goes back to the beginning of it is identifying what you want to do and what level of service you're going to be able to provide. So like you said, a car on its side, a car on its roof, and definitely a car on all fours. I think that's typical rescue engine capabilities, and again, depending on whether you're going to rescue engine or engine rescue is where, how much of that you can handle. When you start talking about large commercial vehicles, then we're out of it. We're into calling in the resources of the heavy rescue down the street, right? But that's the beauty of mutual aid or automatic aid or, whatever you have set up is that you have those, that ability. I think the other thing that when you talk about struts and things like the come-alongs and cribbing and tiebacks that would come with the traditional car on its side or is, airbags lifting, things like that, is that you have to leverage technology and changes in equipment in your conversation with this change to a combination unit. If you have a heavy rescue squad or a little, engine rescue and you're going to go to a rescue engine, then you have to look, you're probably not going to be able to keep the same equipment that you had for the last 20 years and move it over. You have to look at different ways to do things. So whereas come-alongs and, other chain-driven types of tiebacks were used, does a ratchet strap cover the weight rating to do same side opposing force on a vehicle that's just happens to be on its side. And all you're trying to do is, stop it from moving. So that takes up less space. What size struts do I need to carry to do the same thing? There are multiple different levels and layers and sizes of struts out there. But what do I need to do to accomplish, again, what we set forth out in the beginning? I said we were going to be able to do this, this, and this. If it gets beyond this, then we can't do it. And the same thing goes into firefighting tools. Again, rescues are known to carry fans and lights. Well, do you need a generator on a rescue engine anymore? Can you run everything off a battery? Can you run battery powered fans? Can you run, can you buy, instead of buying a fire service light, can you buy a Milwaukee or a DeWalt or, some other type of Home Depot tripod light, or Lowe's or whoever else, Menards, or, depending on where you are in a country, you want to buy from a big box store. Can you buy one of those, lights in place of a traditional fire service piece of equipment, because it takes up less space or, you can use it. And again, these are all these conversations that you have to have before you just jump into it and say, we're going to combine units. Well, I mean, there's a lot that goes into this because again, you're trying to fit a lot of equipment and two different types of fireground functions, into one piece of apparatus and try to make it do at least one thing really well and one thing okay. So again, it's identifying that and then utilizing technology and changes in equipment to make up for what you're going to kind of limit yourself to some extent.
And something to add on to your point there with balancing the fireground expectations, because if in your jurisdiction, maybe your mutual aid partners, I've seen it where engine rescues, they get dispatched as an engine within so many miles of their first due. And then there's a switch that flips at a certain mile, and now they're considered a rescue. And they get dispatched on these mutual aid boxes as rescues. And the inverse could be true, right? They could be a rescue first in their own jurisdiction, then an engine second. So just keep that in mind when your specking committee is going through how are your partners going to use you, and be careful about taking everything under the sun that a special service might be qualified to do truck companies included, and saying, well, we need some of those tools too. You can quickly get out of hand with the amount of stuff you shove in compartments. When if you really try to take a 50-50 approach on these units, you're going to end up with too much stuff. You might even overload your apparatus, which is the last thing you want to do. So yeah, keep that in mind.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, Alex. That's something that hasn't necessarily been mentioned yet is identifying the amount of weight of stuff you're going to carry on the apparatus. We talk about how much we're going to need, and you mentioned heavy vehicle with chain, with larger struts, capacities, all that. When I hear all this kind of going on, I just think weight, and is it going to be able to handle that? And I think one thing in the previous conversation, we kind of have between us talked about and maybe not laid out as well the different types of that rescue engine rescue, and what that might look like. If you have an engine that is, your everyday engine, and you put a combi tool on it, that's not an engine rescue in our mind, right? That's an engine that has a combi tool and maybe some step trucks on it. You take on the other side of the spectrum, and you have a tandem axle heavy duty rescue squad that has the oh crap little tank and pump on it with 200 gallons of water, 250 gallon per minute pump. That's not a rescue engine or anything like that either, right? That's a rescue squad that just has a little backup plan, basically a larger water can. So we're really talking about the two in between vehicles, and it comes down to the full depth compartments on one side or both, or just the normal depth compartments on one side or both. And so that kind of, I guess, paints a bigger picture or better picture of the space that we have. Then we go into NFPA and what their standard allotment of equipment is, and it's 2,500 pounds. So you got to really stay within that bounds. And if you don't, that's okay. You just really have to tell them that. So, we've mentioned this a million times across the podcast, and you'll hear it probably a million more. Identify that mission and the equipment before you start speccing the fire truck, right? How big those compartments are and how much weight it can handle. That has to be figured out. And for these units, especially any rescue type vehicle, you're buying closet space. That's really it. And so what goes in that closet could be, a set of cones and, a PFD, or it could be grade 100 chain, times 6 or 7 lengths of 20 to 30 feet apiece, which is a whole different category of weight. So I think that's something that we can kind of throw in there to help bridge that gap of thought process of what this rescue engine might look like, or engine rescue, and kind of, as you start dividing those two units out, which direction you can maybe head, and then start that conversation out with the committee and whoever you're looking at to build this fire truck.
Yeah, and I think Alex said something kind of important there is making sure that your mutual aid partners understand what you're buying. Because again, the term rescue engine gets thrown around, and the ability to use it as both, is thrown around too. But if I build a rescue engine that has one cross lay on it, and call that a rescue engine, when it gets dispatched first due or shows up because it's dispatched on a box as an engine, and it shows up first due and it can't complete a lay and it only has one hand line off of it, then we've thrown the whole rest of the box into a mess on trying to create hand lines and find discharges. And the same thing, if you're being dispatched as a rescue engine to assist on a heavy rescue somewhere because they think your capabilities are greater than they are, then when you get there, you've just delayed the patient treatment or extrication or whatever is needed on that.
All right, so we kind of covered, the equipment in a decent amount of light, and I don't want to get too deep into the equipment because that's a whole nother podcast in itself, and might be one that you hear next if you're paying attention and listening along to this series. But I guess really the next question is, how are we going to fit all of this stuff on this unit? You're taking what would be a rescue and what would be an engine and trying to kind of mash it into one. And I guess really better question than how we're going to fit it. What are we sacrificing? What are things that we're going to give up? And I'll throw this one to you first, Moody.
Okay. So, I mean, you're hamstringing me here now. Let me talk about equipment. I'm kind of a gear guy. So what we're looking at here too is equipment space requires compartment space. That is just a given. Now, if you decide that you're going to go with full depth compartments on one side, that's an obvious, answer to some of your problems. You can fit in a whole bunch of equipment in those full depth compartments. Obviously, that is going to impact your hose bed. So the logical conclusion, if you're going rescue engine versus engine rescue, maybe somebody would say, well, we're going to go full depth on both sides. If you look at some pictures of units that have full depth compartments on both sides, that clearly compromises room for your hoses, right? So keep that in mind as you start to negotiate what type of vehicle extrications you're going to respond to and which equipment you want to carry for those things. When you're doing that, you kind of have to make your decision up front on the equipment that you're going to want to carry, maybe even before you decide where you want the full depth compartments, how many you want. Go look at the spec sheets. There are so many companies out there making really high-tech, fancy stabilization equipment across the spectrum. If you're only going to respond to, your 3 to 5, maybe 6,000 pound vehicles, there's struts for that. And you can make those fit your budget. If you're going to be doing a whole bunch of combination work and maybe you're part of a tech rescue team or you want to go on the heavier side, there's struts for that. But all of them have in common a spec sheet with measurements. Go take a look at those measurements and figure out how big are your compartments actually going to be for the number of struts you decide that you think you need to carry. An easy one to plan ahead is your cribbing complement, right? 4x4s, 6x6s. Keep in mind dimensional lumber for those splitting hairs, but you can take a measurement of that. You can build that out in your bay right now and decide how big that compartment for cribbing needs to be ahead of time and make sure that you can stack it appropriately and pull it out. Easy at 3 a.m., right? You don't want people digging around in compartments for equipment when it should be easy to get out. So leave room for that stuff. Your extrication tools are the same thing. There are spec sheets from pretty much every company that are going to give you these measurements. So your research and your homework is going to be completely necessary before you decide how many full depth compartments you want. And the same goes for all your firefighting tools, right? So we should know how long our axes are and stuff, because it's trying to have a compartment that just barely holds what you need it to is going to make life harder for your firefighters. So Win, what else do you have?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to add there. So you're talking about building compartments out, and I think there's two things to remember is that the true depth or width of the compartment is going to be different than the door opening, whether you have lap doors or roll-up doors. So you need to factor that in. And then you also need to factor in whatever type of shelving or pull-out tray you're going to put in there. Shelf tracks take up a 1/2 inch of space on each side. So there's an inch of compartment space you lose. Shelves can be, anywhere for roll-out trays can take up to an inch, with the roll-out hardware underneath of them. That's going to lose height in your compartment. So if you're planning on having your, 65-inch struts on a roll-out compartment, it's going to take the whole space up, and you didn't factor that in. Well, then when you go to put it in, your compartment's not going to fit. So, again, it's when you're in the process of designing this fire truck, you need to already be thinking about what you're going to put into it and where you're going to put into it. I think that's a really great idea to build compartments out, especially if you're doing something new or you're unsure, and try to figure out a couple $100 on lumber spent now will save you thousands of dollars later when you've bought the equipment, when you've backed the apparatus in, and it doesn't, what you plan on putting in there doesn't fit. And now you're shoving stuff in a pickup truck to get it to the scene. I think the other thing with, like we said before, we're giving stuff up to do one or the other, right? So, and I think on the rescue side, or the engine rescue side, I guess, it gives you the ability to really get creative, or there's a lot of room essentially left over on your engine when you decide to do that. if you do full depth compartments on either side, it's going to leave a lot of room basically above the top of the compartment where you can put some type of hatch compartment. And again, how you want to design that out, it could be a 2-foot wide hatch compartment that's close to 24 inches deep. That's the full length of the body. That's a lot of storage space. If your hose bed is not full depth, you've designed a short hose bed, a 78 or 80 inch deep hose bed, because that's the best, design for your hose complement. Well, that still leaves a lot of room at the top of the fire truck for some type of compartment, especially depending on the size of your water tank. If you're running a 750 or 1,000 gallon water tank on a longer body because you've extended the body out, it's not a short pumper body, there's a lot of room up at the top for you to put equipment. So again, you think about, we're losing all this space to do it. You are, but if you think about and prioritize what needs to be down low, what can be up high, we can continue to build, keeping weight in mind, obviously, our capabilities with this apparatus. And you can fit in, stuff like water rescue vests, or throw bags that you might not need every day, but, you still have flooding issues that you need to be able to provide that for. Some low angle rope rescue that you're capable of doing. You have places to put this stuff if you just think through it and think about all the void spaces and capabilities on your fire truck. So, again, you're giving stuff up one way or the other. So get creative, try to find out what you could do. Again, it's going to be good at one thing and okay at the other. So I'm not a huge speedlay, or I guess speedlay is a technical term for it, fan, for engine company work. But for a rescue engine or a rescue as a priority, stacking hand lines over top of each other, that might buy me some more space to put, whatever. And you have to think too, EMS wise as well. Can I put a longboard in there? Do I need to be able to do some type of trench where I can put a panel behind that cross lay if I stack them on top of each other? Again, I still have my 2 hand lines, so it's functional as an engine, but it's not what I would say is ideal. Same thing. Can we look at a different style pump? Can we look at a more compact pump to buy space, things like that? So, again, it's getting creative based on the function of the fire truck that you want. And again, what you're willing to give up.
And I think on the rescue engine side of the house too, is if you go look at heavy rescue, they probably have maybe pneumatic tools. They've got hydraulic tools. They've got, reciprocating saws of different manufacturers and varieties, all these different hand tools. You may have to scale back those expectations too. The stabilization we spent a lot of time talking about. Certainly the debate on a hydraulic system with actual hoses versus the battery powered tools, you're going to have to make that decision. I think that's a little bit easier to do these days than it was maybe even 5 years ago. Certainly a decade ago, nobody was going to make that choice. But now there are really viable options that don't require you to have a hydraulic pump on board, right? And I think we've touched on that. But even your other tools, those reciprocating saws, whether they're corded or batteries, they need a place to go. They can't just float freely, right? So you need to have them in a bin or attached somehow so they're not getting beat up in your compartments and they're easy to get at. But those take up space. So do the batteries. If you choose to go to the battery powered ecosystem of your choice, you need a way to charge those. So now there's other choices you have to make. Is the electrical system that you're speccing out, is that capable of, dealing with charging your batteries? Or are you going to carry a few and charge them all back at the firehouse? That's a choice to make. So keep in mind that those choices are also going to require a compromise too. You're not going to be able to be the rolling toolbox on wheels that, a traditional tandem axle heavy rescue can be.
Yeah, and with that, talking about the charging capabilities with the change to NFPA 1900, your charging system now has to be able to charge your batteries as well as anything that's connected to the battery direct. So you're seeing where most people would be okay with a 40 amp charging system in the past, we're seeing where we're running into an 80 amp charging system might not do everything that we used to be able to do in the past. So you have to think about, how am I going to charge those batteries? Are they only going to be charged when they're hooked up to the shoreline? Do I need the capability to charge them with a transfer switch and an inverter or a generator So they're charging all the time. But again, the battery direct flashlights and pack trackers and gas meters and all that stuff you have to look into today is how we're going to be able to do that, and how the manufacturers and NFPA 1900 are going to dictate the changes that we're going to make based on that.
Yeah, and I think you guys kind of talked about the engine versus rescue capability. One thing that kind of to think about too is that that reserve quote unquote status, and in Prince George's County, where I volunteer at, there's a couple units out there that had an engine, a rescue, and then the rescue engine was like their backup for both units. And traveling across doing these fleet evaluations and apparatus needs assessments now, I kind of see that a little bit in these departments, and they try to kind of cheat out and do everything that it can. Well, if the engine has 1,000 gallons of water, well, the rescue engine is going to have 1,000 gallons of water. If the engine has 1,500 feet of 5-inch, well, the rescue engine is going to have 1,500 feet of 5-inch. And as you start going down that list, there's not the compromise that we're talking about now, and everything becomes very difficult. And back to Moody's points about setting this vehicle up for success. You ask the driver, "Hey, you've been driving for a while, yeah? All right, you roll up on an extrication now. Car on its side. Where are you parking the rig? Well, we just position. All right, well, where? And there's no thought process because the vehicle hasn't been laid out to say, hey, listen, this compartment is my stabilization compartment, or has my tools, or I want to make it easier for the fellows operating on the scene. I want to park it right here because that's it. If you ask, Rescue 102 drivers across the shifts, it's pretty easy, right? We're riding in the back, and that's pretty much where our extrication stuff is. And most of it's on the officer side that we're going to go use. So if they have a choice, they're going to line that officer side up with whatever we're going to do. We have attachment points there to do tiebacks on. We have our extrication tools. We have our stabilization tools. Now, if it's anywhere else, we can still, obviously make our call and adjust our procedures from there. But there should be a somewhat of a game plan when you're getting out there, and that starts with that apparatus specing, right? We have the equipment. Let's lay this thing out. And here we were talking about it in New Carlisle, Indiana. I showed them the picture from specking, College Park's ladder truck, and a bunch of us in the room were hand drawing stuff on a piece of paper. And then the next picture I showed them was the ladder truck when it came in. And obviously my drawing's not very well. I don't color good, but it showed what it was supposed to look like and what it turned out to be. And it's like, this is the level of detail we need to go into that with. And these units, I mean, we can't say it enough how important that is to start out, because you are going to sacrifice something. And the last thing you want to sacrifice is the function of the vehicle or the intent of the vehicle. And so I think, a lot of the points that we've talked about kind of drive that home. And there's definitely more to cover, and we will definitely be back to this topic for sure. As we come to a close here, and we covered a pretty good amount of information, and we definitely have more to dive deeper into in our next episode. But I guess on our departing words, is there any words from wisdom, any takeaways that we want to talk about here for these combination engine rescue units? We'll start with Moody.
Yeah, I think when you're speccing these units out, and it depends on where you live, but everywhere seems to be growing. Try to plan ahead, because you might have this apparatus for a very long time, especially with lead times. I mean, that alone is an obstacle for your future growth, for your community and your fire department. Try to spec this rig out if you're doing that with the intent that, hey, we can manipulate this and have it evolve as our service needs to evolve for our community and for the department. And then the other thing is when you delve into the world of equipment, which we kind of just dipped our toe into today, keep in mind the training aspect. 100%, you can put all of the fanciest equipment on this, especially on the rescue side of the house. But if your people are not trained, you're setting them and your department up for failure, and certainly your citizens. So keep in mind, whatever you're putting on there as you introduce new equipment and new tactics, that you need to do a commensurate amount of training along with that, and hopefully before the apparatus rolls into your bay, to be parked and put in service. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. Don't not train on these things, please.
Yeah, I think again, it's do your homework. Do your homework at the beginning of what we're going to carry, what it's going to weigh, where it's going to go, and that's after you determine the true function of the apparatus. That sounds like a broken record because I think I've said it on every podcast, but I think that's the key. I think people forget that sometimes. Is you get excited about buying a fire truck, and it being able to do a multitude of things, but you need to lay out what this thing is going to do well and make that fire truck do that well. And then the ancillary things come after that. Again, you're going to a rescue engine or engine rescue or whatever, maybe because you have one and you're building it again. It doesn't mean that you get to skip out on those first two parts. But if you're doing it because of changing needs in your community, then you need to determine what type of level of service you need in there, what you're going to provide and what you're capable of providing. And then you have to understand that and you have to, again, leverage the ability of your neighboring fire companies to assist you in providing that coverage. So I think those are the big three things. Moody already talked about the equipment and training on the equipment that you're going to carry. But again, that needs to be determined up front. And then, again, don't use the apparatus to fix manpower issues. Don't try to do everything with one engine or rescue because you're going to limit the function on a fire ground. If you say, well, we only have 4 people and we can only get one truck out, well, then get one truck out and do that one thing well. Again, don't pull up to a house fire and not be able to complete the lay down the line or the driveway because you only had 700 feet of hose because that's what you could fit on your rescue engine. Don't pull up to a truck on its side and not be able to stabilize or do anything because you didn't plan for that or your rescue engine isn't capable of that. Build the rescue, build the engine, and then try to figure the manpower out other ways. Again, leverage your neighboring responses or neighboring fire departments and work together to solve these issues. The apparatus, building is not getting any better. It's not going to get better anytime in the near future. Like timeframes aren't going to go down. Money's definitely not going to go down. You might see a time frame go down a little bit, but the cost of apparatus, that I don't think you'll ever see that come back down to where it's, what I would say is reasonable. It's just what we have to deal with if we're going to continue to purchase and build new apparatus. So make sure you do it right from the start. A 3 to 4 year build time. When you back that in and it doesn't meet your needs or meet the intent that you intended, and it's only going to fall back on you at that case. So do your homework, take the time, identify the function, and build it right from the beginning.
Yeah, I think you guys covered a ton of points here, and I think for me, listening to you guys and kind of seeing what we see with fleet evaluations going around, the staffing thing is huge. The trying to fit everything on one vehicle. We've talked about that on other podcasts too. I think really with this, and we've talked about it with specking, it's a lot of work. It's not easy. It's a ton to do. These vehicles, it's even harder, right? For a ladder truck, a PPV fan, there's a little bit of research to do there, but it's kind of pretty straightforward for the most part, right? Battery, not battery, your CFM, what you're looking to ventilate. Saws, same thing, right? There's only so many manufacturers of chainsaws and circular saws out there. Pretty straightforward, right? Ladders, only a handful of ladder manufacturers, and it's what's going to fit. So you start looking at this research you have to do for equipment, it's not really there. Well, on a rescue squad or a rescue engine or a rescue type vehicle, I mean, once you get your mission, you're only just starting your path down research. And it's not that, hey, we have to replace the rescue engine this year and we got to sign a contract. Let's start the work. We're looking like a year ahead of time, right? We should be looking at this vehicle. Hey, what's working well? What's not working well? And let's start talking about our neighbor's capability, our capability, and how we're going to move forward. And like Moody had said, building in that ability to expand and contract with what's going on in your area around with buildings and everything else that's going to happen, and and even staffing too. I think that's probably the biggest thing is that there's so much work that goes into specking, and now you're adding that equipment part of it too. There's just a ton of work. So get your committee together early, work together, and then watch that weight. I can't say enough times that you're watching your weight and making sure you understand and what that is. And then, as I say in every podcast, ask for help. The internet makes the fire service very, very, very small. So look out there who has rigs, look at any manufacturer who's putting them out there. If you have a choice manufacturer, call people that bought those rigs. If you don't have a choice manufacturer, look at all the manufacturers and figure out the last couple rescue engine or engine type rescue vehicles they bought and ask them to send you pictures, right? How do they like their vehicle? Who's going to fix it? All the questions that you need to ask. But this fire service is a pretty small fire service when you look at it with our connectivity. If your neighbors bought one, right, go check it out, figure out what's going on. And then demo, right? Demo. Any equipment that you're going to buy before you sign the check, demo it out, figure it out if it's going to work for you. And again, just ask all those questions. At the very last point here, ask for help, right? Our company, Emergency Vehicle Response, is one of many that offers help in these areas. But ask for help if you haven't done this. And, every time we go somewhere, we kind of get, a little upset and heartbroken when somebody went down a road alone or with a very small committee and buys their first fire truck that they bought in the last 30 years or 25 years and go into this market that even the experts are having trouble navigating because it's so unprecedented and they're just drowning and they get something when it backs in the firehouse that they weren't expecting, don't think it'll work. And again, this vehicle is so specific and so specialized that you really need to get it right from the beginning. With that, I appreciate Alex, Wynn, your guys' time. Thanks for coming out with the podcast and spreading the good information. And we will definitely be coming back to this topic and talking about it more. It's a very in-depth topic and a lot of good information out there. And there's a lot of units like this out there. So for all the listeners, thank you for tuning in today. If you have any questions or comments about the information or want to see something else with future podcasts, you guys know who to reach out to. Chris McClune at clarionevents.com. We'll see you guys in the next episode. Thank you.
In the world of firefighting and public safety, reliability is key. That's why for over 2 decades, first responders nationwide have trusted the Fire Store as their go-to source for essential equipment, apparel, and accessories. From top-of-the-line firefighting gear like helmets, boots, and thermal imaging cameras, the Fire Store has it all, tailored to the specific needs of our heroes on the front lines. But they don't stop there. Their extensive selection also includes EMS supplies, safety apparel like flame-resistant clothing and high-visibility gear, as well as a wide array of tools, from hand tools to vehicle extrication tools, supporting public safety professionals in their duties. Partnered with industry leaders, the Fire Store's commitment to quality and excellence is unmatched, because when it comes to protecting communities, there's no room for compromise. Join the thousands of first responders who rely on the Fire Store. Visit thefirestore.com online or in-store today. The Fire Store, your reliable partner for fire and public safety equipment.